I drove 14 hours to see my granddaughter for the first time. At the maternity ward, my son-in-law greeted me with the words, "Old man, my wife only wants to see her real family. You're nobody to us, loser." I left without saying a word. 2 days later, he called me. "Dad, we urgently need $5,000 for the delivery. Will you help the family?" I took a deep breath and replied, "Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments." The magnifying glass caught the lamplight just right, turning the tiny 1893 Columbian Exposition stamp into a miniature world of detail. I was examining the perforations, perfectly intact, which made this specimen worth considerably more than the catalog suggested, when my phone rang. The old rotary-style handset felt substantial in my palm, a relic like me. "Dad, it's me!" I set down the magnifying glass. My daughter Inez hadn't called in 2 months. Her voice had that particular tremor I remembered from childhood, the one that preceded tears. Can we come over? Right now? It's urgent." 20 minutes later, they stood in my doorway. My daughter looked like she'd aged 5 years since Christmas. My son-in-law, Sidney's eyes were bloodshot. His usually pressed shirt wrinkled. Something had broken them. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. They didn't sit. Sidney paced my small living room, while Inez stood frozen near the door, staring at the carpet. The silence stretched until I couldn't bear it. "What's happened?" Sidney's voice cracked. "The doctors, they said stage 3, pancreatic. I have maybe 6 months without aggressive treatment." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd watched my wife Margaret deteriorate from cancer 15 years ago. I knew what those words meant. "The experimental protocol at Johns Hopkins is my only real chance," Sidney continued, pulling papers from his jacket with shaking hands. "But it's not covered. $150,000 just to start. Surgery and rehab, another 100. Insurance will only cover 50. He showed me documents, medical letterheads, treatment plans, cost breakdowns. They flashed past too quickly in his trembling hands, but I saw enough. Johns Hopkins. Stage 3. Experimental. Inez finally moved, crossing to me and taking both my hands. Her palms were ice cold. "Dad, you always said family comes first. You said that when Mom was sick." Her eyes filled. "I know we haven't been close lately, and that's my fault. But Sidney is my family now. I can't lose him. We've tried everything. Maxed out cards, asked his parents. You're our last hope." I thought of Inez at 8 years old, crying after falling off her bicycle. I'd bandaged her knee and promised I'd always protect her. That instinct never disappeared, no matter how old she got. "Of course I'll help," I said, my own throat tight. "You don't even have to ask. Whatever it takes. Sidney is family. We'll figure this out together." Sidney exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for hours. "We need to apply for a medical loan. The bank said with your credit score and if you co-sign, we can get approved quickly. Time matters here. Every week counts." "I'll do more than co-sign," I told him. "Put it in my name. I don't care. What's mine is yours." Inez actually sobbed then, dropping her head onto my shoulder. I held my daughter and watched Sidney close his eyes with something that looked like profound relief. Too much relief maybe, but I pushed the thought away. The man had just been handed a death sentence. Of course he was overwhelmed. We scheduled the bank appointment for the following Tuesday. I wrote it down on my notepad. First National Bank of Miami, 10 a.m., loan application. My handwriting looked steady. My hand had trembled. They left quickly after that, Sidney mentioning doctor's appointments and treatment plans. I stood in my doorway watching their car pull away, Sidney behind the wheel. Through the windshield, I saw him say something to Inez, and his face shifted, still strained, but different, lighter somehow. Inside my apartment, the stamp album lay open on the table. The Columbian Exposition stamp gazed back at me, a tiny ship sailing toward an unknown shore. I picked up the papers Sidney had shown me, meaning to look more closely at the treatment details. The Johns Hopkins logo seemed slightly off. Wrong shade of blue, maybe? I held it up to the light, squinting. The paper quality felt thin. But then again, these were probably printouts from a patient portal. Everything was digital now. Nothing like the crisp letterhead from Margaret's oncologists all those years ago. I set the papers down and returned to my stamps, but the peace of the evening had evaporated. Something nagged at me, a wrongness I couldn't identify. Sidney's relief had seemed disproportionate, his shoulders dropping the instant I'd agreed to help. But what did I know? The man was drowning, and I'd thrown him a rope. Anyone would look relieved. I closed the album and turned off the lamp. But sleep came slowly that night. In the darkness, I kept seeing Inez's face. Not as she'd looked today, but as she'd been at her wedding 3 years ago, radiant as she promised to love Sidney in sickness and in health. I'd walked her down that aisle believing she'd found someone worthy of her. Now that man was dying, and I had the power to save him. The thought should have brought comfort. Instead, it left me staring at the ceiling until dawn, wondering why my daughter had waited 2 months to call and why she hadn't looked me in the eye even once. I arrived at the bank 15 minutes early, my notepad tucked under my arm, with the questions I'd prepared the night before. How exactly would the loan work? What were the repayment terms? Could payments be deferred during treatment? I'd written 7 questions in neat print. I never asked a single one. Inez and Sidney rushed in at 10:17, both breathless. Sidney immediately approached the loan officer's desk, barely acknowledging me. "Sorry we're late," he said to the young woman behind the computer. "Traffic on I-95. My father-in-law is helping us with a medical emergency. Time is critical. We have the pre-approval letter from last week. You have all the documentation already, correct? Let's move this along." The officer, whose nameplate read Jessica Ramos, glanced at me uncertainly. "Mr. Hawkins, if you'll have a seat, we can begin the application process." But Sidney stayed standing, positioning himself beside the computer screen. "I can help Dad with the forms," he said. "Some of the questions are complicated, and with his hearing, my hearing was fine. I opened my mouth to say so, but Inez touched my shoulder. "It's okay, Dad. Sidney knows all the medical details. It'll be faster." So I sat and watched Sidney type while occasionally asking me questions. Address, I gave it. Social security number, I recited it. Employment history. I told him about my 40 years at the university library, the retirement 3 years ago. "Current assets?" Jessica asked, reading from her screen. "Dad has his pension and Social Security," Sidney answered before I could speak, "and the apartment's paid off." "I asked Mr. Hawkins," Jessica said, her tone professionally neutral but firm. "Right, yes, the apartment's paid for," I confirmed. "Pension is about $3,000 monthly, Social Security another $2,000. Sidney's fingers flew across the keyboard. Jessica's expression remained carefully blank, but something in her posture suggested discomfort. She kept glancing at me, then at Sidney, then back to her screen. The printer whirred. Documents emerged, page after page. Sidney gathered them and set them before me with a pen. "Just standard loan documents," he said. "Sign at each highlighted tab." I picked up my reading glasses and started with the first page. The letterhead swam before my eyes. Too much legal language, too dense. I found my place. Principal amount, $700,000. My hand froze. "Wait, this says $700,000? I thought you needed $250 for treatment?" Sidney didn't miss a beat. "That's the approved credit line. Think of it like a credit card limit. Just because it's available doesn't mean we use it all. The bank requires a higher amount for medical loans to cover potential complications. We'll only draw what the treatment actually costs." It made sense. Probably. I looked at Inez, seeking confirmation, but she was staring at the wall, her jaw tight. "Mr. Hawkins," Jessica said, making deliberate eye contact with me. "You understand this loan is in your name, and you are fully responsible for repayment regardless of how funds are used?" "Yes, I understand. It's for my son-in-law's cancer treatment." She paused. "And you've reviewed the terms? The interest rate is 6.8% on the full amount." 6.8 seemed high, but what did I know about medical loans? I nodded. Sidney checked his watch. "We really need to finish this. The doctor's coordinating with Baltimore." I picked up the pen. It felt heavier than it should have. Page after page, I signed my name. Waldo Hawkins. Waldo Hawkins. Waldo Hawkins. 12 times total. On page 7, I tried to read a clause about disbursement, but Sidney's phone rang. "It's the oncologist," he said urgently. "I have to take this." He stepped away, voice low and serious, words I couldn't quite catch. Inez leaned close and squeezed my shoulder. "Thank you for saving him," she whispered. I signed the rest without reading. What choice did I have? My son-in-law was dying. Jessica printed a final form, had me initial it, then handed me a thick envelope. "Your copies of everything. Review them carefully at home." "We need to go now," Inez said, already standing. "The doctor's coordinating with Baltimore. I'll call you when we get there, I promise." "Thank you, Dad. You're saving his life." "Drive safe," I managed. "Tell Sydney I'm thinking of him. I love you." "Love you too." She was already walking away, Sydney's hand on her back, guiding her toward the exit. I sat there holding the envelope as they disappeared through the glass doors. Jessica watched them go, her expression unreadable. "Do you need anything else, Mr. Hawkins?" she asked quietly. I shook my head and left. Back home, I spread the documents across my kitchen table. The legal language was impenetrable, whereas and hereinafter and covenant to repay. I found the section marked purpose of loan and read medical expenses related to cancer treatment. I called Inez's cell. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. "Honey, it's Dad. Just wanted to make sure you got on the road okay. Call when you can." I tried again an hour later, same result. At 3 p.m., I sent a text. "Thinking of you both. Let me know when you arrive safely." No response. I remembered a conversation from Inez's wedding reception. Sydney's father, Irving, had made some dismissive comment about my quaint stamp hobby. His mother, Eva, had smiled tightly and changed the subject. I'd felt like an outsider at my own daughter's wedding, tolerated but not welcomed. The stamp album sat on the shelf where I had left it, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. Instead, I stared at my phone, willing it to ring. At 7 p.m., I searched online for Johns Hopkins pancreatic cancer program, thinking I'd send encouragement. The website was professional and detailed, full of statistics and treatment options. Everything looked legitimate, but Inez still hadn't called. I picked up the loan papers again, forcing myself to read more carefully. Page 9 mentioned a disbursement schedule. Funds would be released within 3 business days to an account ending in 7834. I didn't recognize the account number. I tried calling again. Voicemail. Night fell. My apartment grew dark around me, but I didn't turn on lights. I just sat there with the phone in one hand and those papers in the other, watching the numbers blur together while a cold certainty settled in my chest. Something was very wrong. 3 days of silence finally broke me. I drove to Maxwell Chin's office on Brickell Avenue, the loan documents in a folder on my passenger seat. Maxwell and I went back 30 years. I'd referred wealthy clients to him when he was building his real estate practice, back when I was still brokering art deals for collectors who owned Picassos. His receptionist recognized me immediately. "Mr. Hawkins, it's been too long." Maxwell emerged from his office before I could sit down. He looked the same, sharp suit, reading glasses on a chain, that penetrating gaze that had served him well in courtrooms. When he saw my face, his smile faded. "Waldo, what's wrong?" I handed him the folder without a word. He read standing up, flipping through pages faster as he went. I watched his jaw tighten, watched his knuckles whiten around the papers. "Your own daughter?" He looked up, genuinely horrified. "Waldo, this is textbook criminal fraud. Falsified loan application, misrepresentation of purpose, possible forgery. She could face 5 to 10 years in federal prison." "I know." My voice came out steady, which surprised me. "That's why I came to you instead of the police. I need a different approach." Maxwell studied me over his glasses. "You want justice, not revenge, but you want them to feel it." "I don't want her in prison," I said. "I want her to understand what she did." He smiled then, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Then, let's educate them, systematically." I hired a private investigator that afternoon. Robert Sterling, another old contact, former FBI, now running corporate security investigations. I gave him everything: Sydney's name, their address, Irving and Iva's information. 2 weeks later, he delivered a dossier that made my stomach turn. Sydney and my daughter Inez owed $235,000 in combined debts: credit cards, auto loans, personal loans from predatory lenders. Irving Dunn had lost $800,000 in failed investments in 2023 and owed $340,000 to various creditors. His home was facing foreclosure. The house at 456 Alhambra Circle, purchased with my $700,000 loan for Irving and Eva. But the worst part was the audio recording. Robert had obtained it legally, phone tap authorized through my rights as the loan holder. I sat in my apartment, evening light fading through the windows, and pressed play. Sydney's voice came through clear and cold. Your father accomplished nothing. He collects stamps in that depressing apartment. He's almost 70 and has nothing to show for it. At least now he can be useful, sign some papers, give us a fresh start. Inez's voice weak. Sydney, that's harsh. He's still my dad. Who ignores your calls? Who never helped with the wedding? He's checked out of life. This doesn't hurt him. He doesn't even understand what $700,000 means. I stopped the recording. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me too. I walked to my filing cabinet and unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside was a leather-bound contact book from my art dealing days, 1985 to 2020. I flipped through names, museum curators, auction house executives, real estate investors, people who had trusted me with millions of their dollars. I picked up my phone and called Maxwell back. They think I'm a failure who wastes air, I told him. They think I don't understand money. They have no idea who I actually am. Then let's educate them. Maxwell's voice held satisfaction. I'll need complete financials. Everything. I opened my personal safe that night. Inside were documents I hadn't looked at in years. Business sale paperwork from 2020 showing $3.8 million in proceeds, real estate investment portfolios worth $1.2 million, philatelic collection appraisals totaling $400,000. I'd spent 35 years building a reputation in the art world. I'd worked with collectors who owned Rothkos and Vermeers. I'd brokered deals worth millions. After Margaret died, I'd chosen to live quietly in a modest apartment, traveling occasionally, enjoying my stamps, volunteering at the library. That was wisdom, not weakness. A choice, not a failure. They'd mistaken humility for helplessness. That was their first mistake. The surveillance photos arrived 2 days later. Inez and Sydney shopping for Italian furniture in Coral Gables. Irving and Eva receiving delivery trucks at the Alhambra Circle House. Sydney and his parents celebrating with champagne on the back patio. One photo showed Inez standing alone in the new kitchen, staring at her phone. For a moment, I wondered if she was thinking about calling me. Then Sydney appeared beside her, and she put the phone away. I spread the photos across my kitchen table and studied them methodically. This was no longer about emotion. This was strategy. Maxwell called that evening. I've identified multiple avenues. The loan application stated medical expenses. That's a material misrepresentation. The funds went to purchase property for third parties. That violates the loan terms. If we can prove Irving and Eva knew about the misrepresentation, they become co-conspirators. Can you prove they knew? That's where your detective friend comes in. Text messages, emails, recorded calls. We build an airtight case, then we approach the bank with a proposal. I remembered teaching 10-year-old Inez about art at a museum, explaining how to spot quality in paintings. Value isn't always obvious, I'd told her. You need a trained eye to see it. She'd forgotten that lesson. Judged me by the surface appearance of my modest apartment rather than the substance underneath. That was her second mistake. By early May, I had a complete picture. Sydney desperately needed to impress his parents, Eva especially, who called him a failure, who compared him constantly to the successful children of her friends. Buying them a house was his grand gesture, his proof of worth. Through my old business contacts, I learned Sydney's private debts could be purchased at a discount. I made discreet inquiries with debt buyers. Within a week, I'd acquired $67,000 in Sydney's debt for $42,000. 60 cents on the dollar. The creditors were happy to offload non-performing loans. Sydney had no idea who now controlled his financial pressure points. I sat in Maxwell's office on a Wednesday afternoon, reviewing documents. The beauty of this approach, Maxwell explained, is the bank becomes your ally. They violated their own underwriting standards. They're exposed to regulatory scrutiny, but if you assume the loan and take the property, their problem disappears. And Irving and Iva lose the house they thought Sydney bought them. Precisely. Maxwell smiled. The house was purchased with fraudulently obtained funds. The title is clouded. When we prove Irving and Iva knew about the fraud, and we will, they can't claim innocent purchaser status. I looked out his window at Brickell Avenue below, at the gleaming towers and busy streets. I'd lived in this city for 40 years, built a career, raised a daughter, buried a wife. I'd chosen quiet retirement not because I'd failed, but because I'd succeeded enough to afford peace. They'd mistaken that peace for defeat. That was their final mistake. File the complaint, I told Maxwell. Let's show them what I actually accomplished in life. Robert Sterling called that evening with one more detail. They're planning a housewarming party, July 20th. Catering, live jazz band, guest list of 50 people. Irving's old business associates, neighbors from his country club days. I pulled out my calendar and circled the date in red marker. Then I sat back and allowed myself a cold smile. The party would be perfect. Maxwell filed the complaint with First National Bank on a Monday morning, 47 pages documenting every violation. Loan application stating medical expenses, funds diverted to real estate purchase, false information about treatment at Johns Hopkins. I'd signed an affidavit under penalty of perjury, confirming every fact. The bank's compliance department opened an investigation within 72 hours. While they investigated, I worked on other fronts. Through intermediaries and old business contacts, I systematically purchased Sydney's debts, not just the $67,000 I'd already acquired. I bought every note I could find, personal loans, predatory lenders, even a $15,000 loan he'd taken out last week. For party expenses, according to Robert Sterling's intelligence. The creditors were delighted to sell. Sydney hadn't made a payment in months. They got immediate cash, I got leverage. Everyone won except Sydney. By mid-June, I controlled over $80,000 of his debt, all through anonymous LLC structures. He had no idea who owned his financial future. Jennifer Wu's notary office in Coral Gables smelled like lavender and old paper. She was a professional I'd used years ago for art transactions, back when I was still brokering deals. She remembered me. Mr. Hawkins, it's been a while. She gestured to her conference table. Maxwell sent over the documents you need. Quite a situation you found yourself in. She spread out the paperwork. A deed in lieu of foreclosure, transferring property from Irving and Iva Dunn to me, Waldo Hawkins. The document was conditional, pending bank approval and their agreement to reassign the loan to me. Once I record this with Miami-Dade County, Jennifer explained, you become the legal owner. The transfer happens within 24 hours. And they can't stop it? Not if the conditions are met. The bank holds the mortgage. When fraud is proven, they have the right to demand these terms. Irving and Eva's consent isn't required. I signed where she indicated. The pen felt heavier than it should have, or maybe that was just the weight of what I was setting in motion. She notarized each signature, her seal making that distinctive metallic click. How long until we can execute this? I asked. Once the bank signs off, same day. She handed me copies. Mr. Chen will notify me when it's time. The meeting at First National Bank happened on a Thursday. Maxwell and I sat across from Tom Bradford, the senior loan officer who'd processed the original application. He looked like he hadn't slept well in days. Mr. Hawkins? He extended his hand reluctantly. I apologize for our role in this situation. The loan officer should have verified the medical purpose. This is embarrassing for the bank. I'm not interested in suing the bank, Mr. Bradford. I kept my voice calm. I want a solution that makes me whole. Relief flickered across his face. We could declare the loan in default, demand immediate repayment from your son-in-law. But frankly, our research shows he can't pay. Maxwell leaned forward. Which is why my client proposes assuming the loan and taking ownership of the property. You get a qualified borrower, he gets justice. Everyone wins except the people who committed fraud. Bradford looked at me carefully. You understand this means taking over a $700,000 loan? I can afford it, I met his eyes. Check my financials. I'm a far better credit risk than Sidney Dunn ever was. He did check. That afternoon, his office called requesting documentation of my assets. I provided everything: investment accounts, real estate holdings, retirement accounts. The stamp collection alone was worth more than most people's houses. The next morning, Bradford called Maxwell. The bank approves. We'll prepare the assignment documents. Robert Sterling's surveillance continued throughout June. Irving and Iva shopping for party decorations. Sidney working overtime at his car dealership, trying to boost commissions. Inez driving past my apartment twice, never stopping, never knocking, just driving past. The audio surveillance captured a conversation between Irving and one of his old colleagues. My son finally proved himself. He's a real success. bought us this magnificent house in Coral Gables. Complete ignorance. Absolute hubris. Perfect. One evening, I allowed myself to remember. A flashback to 1987, negotiating the purchase of an impressionist painting for a client. The seller thought he was winning, taking my offer too quickly, smiling like he'd gotten away with something. 3 months later, that painting sold at auction for triple what my client paid. I'd learned patience in that business. I'd learned to position pieces carefully, to make the other party think they were winning, right up until the moment they realized they'd lost everything. The same skills applied now. The documents arrived from Jennifer Wu on July 15th. Everything ready, everything legal, everything waiting for my signature and the bank's final approval. Maxwell called that afternoon. Tom Bradford will meet you at the house on July 20th at 3:30. We'll arrive at 3:45, right in the middle of their party. Maximum impact. He's willing to do that? He wants this resolved cleanly, and frankly, he's not fond of people who commit loan fraud. Maxwell paused. How are you holding up? I looked at the calendar on my wall, at the red circle around July 20th. I'm fine. Waldo, she's still your daughter. I know. I did know. That's what made this hurt so much. But she needed to learn this lesson. They all did. I'm not doing this to destroy her. I'm doing this so she understands what she did. That's the difference between justice and revenge, Maxwell said quietly. I'm glad you see it. I hung up and walked to my closet. Selected a modest but dignified suit. Charcoal gray, nothing flashy. The kind of thing a retired librarian might wear to a formal event. Let them see me as they expected. Ordinary, forgettable, harmless. Right up until the moment they realized what I actually was. My phone buzzed. Maxwell again, this time a text. Bank-approved final documents. We're set for Saturday. Tom Bradford confirmed. Time to collect what's owed. I put the phone down and opened my stamp album. The 1893 Columbian Exposition stamp gazed up at me, that tiny ship sailing toward discovery. I'd paid $12,000 for this stamp at auction in 1998. 27 years later, it was worth $35,000. Value isn't always obvious. You need a trained eye to see it. I closed the album and looked at my reflection in the window. An ordinary 67-year-old man in an ordinary apartment. Nothing special, nothing threatening. They'd mistaken the ship for the stamp, seen the surface, missed the treasure. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. The black Lincoln Town car idled 1 block from 456 Alhambra Circle. Through binoculars, I watched guests arrive in expensive cars, watched waiters carry champagne trays through the open front door, watched the jazz band set up on the back patio. 30 minutes of observation. Approximately 50 people. Perfect. Tom Bradford sat beside me in his black Armani suit, leather portfolio on his lap. He checked his watch. 3:45. You ready? I lowered the binoculars. My phone buzzed. Maxwell confirming the property documents had been filed and recorded with Miami-Dade County at 3 o'clock. Everything legal, everything final. Let's proceed, I said. The car pulled up to the circular driveway at exactly 3:45. I stepped out slowly, adjusting my modest charcoal suit. Tom followed with his briefcase, looking every inch the corporate authority figure. Through the windows, I could see Irving gesturing animatedly to a small crowd, probably boasting about his smart investments. Sidney spotted us first. I watched his face through the glass. Confusion, then recognition, then absolute panic. He grabbed Inez's arm, pointed toward the door. She turned, saw me, froze. I walked up the front steps with measured calm. Years of negotiating with wealthy art collectors had taught me the power of controlled movement. Never rush. Let them react. The door opened before I could knock. My daughter Inez stood there, fake smile already forming, trying desperately to manage the situation before it escalated. Dad? Her voice climbed an octave. What are you... How did you get here? I mean, who invited you? This is a private party. I reached into my jacket pocket, slowly. Let the moment build. How did I get here? I pulled out a key ring, held it up so the sunlight caught the metal. 6 keys jingled softly. That's an excellent question, Inez. Let me show you. I identified each key, one by one. Front door, garage, back entrance, study, safe, pool gate. Her fake smile cracked. You're... What? Dad, what are you talking about? I got here with these. I kept my voice calm, conversational. My keys to my house. Behind her, Sydney materialized, his face drained of color. He grabbed her arm, stage whispered loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Why does he have keys? Did you give him keys? You said you'd handle him. I didn't give him anything. Inez's composure was slipping. I haven't spoken to him since the bank. Sydney's eyes shifted to Tom Bradford. I watched understanding dawn across his features. That's a bank manager? His voice barely made it past his lips. That's the loan department guy. Guests were drifting toward the door now, sensing drama. The jazz band continued playing Fly Me to the Moon, creating surreal contrast. Irving Dunn pushed through the gathering crowd, red-faced and aggressive. My son-in-law's father had barely acknowledged my existence at the wedding 3 years ago. Now he looked ready to physically remove me. I don't know what kind of stunt you're pulling, old man. Irving jabbed his finger at my chest. But this is my house. Get off my property before I call the police. I met his eyes without flinching. Your house? Are you certain about that, Irving? Certain. I'm standing in it. My son bought it for us. Now leave. Your son bought it. I paused. With whose money exactly? More guests gathered. I could see phones coming out, recording. Irving's former business partner, a man I recognized from the wedding, pushed closer. Irving, what's this about? You told me you made smart investments for this house. Irving sputtered, his face darkening further. My son-in-law's mother, Eva, appeared beside him in an Oscar de la Renta dress I recognized from surveillance photos. She'd charged $2,800 for it on a credit card she couldn't pay. This is nothing, Eva announced to the crowd, her voice shrill. A misunderstanding. Please, continue enjoying. I gestured to my companion. Allow me to introduce Tom Bradford, Senior Loan Manager at First National Bank of Miami. Mr. Bradford, perhaps you'd like to explain why we're here? Tom opened his portfolio with practiced precision. Mr. and Mrs. Dunn, I have several documents that need to be reviewed. This concerns loan number 7743KD2025, issued in March of this year. Sydney's voice came out strangled. Can't this wait? We're hosting a party. Tom's expression remained professionally neutral. I'm afraid it cannot. The bank's audit revealed significant irregularities. The murmurs started then, background conversations shifting from celebration to confusion. What's happening at the door? Is that Inez's father? Did he say bank manager? Is there a problem with the house? I stepped fully across the threshold, claiming the space. Irving moved to block me, but Tom Bradford's presence made him hesitate. You don't physically confront a man in a $3,000 suit carrying official bank documents, not with 50 witnesses holding cameras. My phone buzzed. Maxwell. I typed back one word. Yes. Inez's carefully constructed party was about to become something else entirely. The jazz band hit a final note and stopped, the sudden silence amplifying every voice at the entrance. I looked at my daughter. She stood frozen, her fake smile completely gone, understanding beginning to dawn that this wasn't going away quietly, that I hadn't come to make peace, I'd come to collect. Tom Bradford's voice cut through the murmurs with professional authority. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for interrupting your celebration, but this concerns a serious matter of bank fraud. The crowd pressed closer. Someone turned off the outdoor speakers. In the sudden quiet, Tom's words carried perfectly. Loan number 7743KD2025 was issued by First National Bank in March 2025, with stated purpose of medical expenses totaling $250,000 for cancer treatment. The loan was issued in the name of Mr. Waldo Hawkins here. He gestured to me. However, our audit revealed the funds were instead used to purchase this property, titled to Irving and Eva Dunn. At no point were medical expenses incurred. This constitutes loan fraud, a federal offense. A woman's voice from the crowd. Wait, so Sydney lied about having cancer? Tom nodded once. There is no record of any cancer diagnosis or treatment for Mr. Sidney Dunn. The reaction rippled through the gathering. Phones lifted higher. Several guests exchanged glances, already backing toward the exit. Nobody wants to be associated with fraud, especially not fraud documented on camera. I stepped forward, all those years presenting art to wealthy collectors, reading a room's energy, knowing when to speak and what to say. I channeled every skill into this moment. My daughter called me in March. My voice stayed level, conversational. First time in 2 months, she and Sydney told me he was dying. Stage 3 pancreatic cancer. Needed emergency experimental treatment. They showed me medical documents. They cried. They begged. I could see Inez's face crumpling, but I continued. I took out a $700,000 loan, in my name, destroying my credit, because I believed I was saving my son-in-law's life. The moment I signed, they disappeared. Wouldn't return calls, wouldn't respond to messages. My voice hardened. I called Johns Hopkins Hospital where they claimed he was being treated. No patient by that name, no treatment, no cancer. Just a very healthy man buying a house for his parents. Dad, please! Inez's voice broke. Not like this. Not like this. I turned to face her directly. You mean not in public? Not where people can see what you did? You wanted me silent and ashamed, but I'm not the one who should be ashamed. Irving tried to salvage the situation, his bluster reaching desperate levels. This is insanity. We knew nothing about any fake medical story. Sydney bought us this house with legitimate funds. The business partner I'd noticed earlier stepped forward. Irving, you told me last month you made smart investments that paid for this. Which is it? Irving's mouth opened and closed. Sydney handled the details. I assumed. Maxwell Chen appeared in the doorway, right on cue, carrying his own briefcase. My attorney and old friend looked like he'd stepped out of a law firm commercial. Mr. Dunn, Maxwell's voice was silk over steel, perhaps you'd like to explain this text message from your son dated March 18th? He held up his phone, showing the screen to nearby guests. I couldn't see it from my angle, but I'd read it a dozen times during preparation. Dad, I found a way. Father-in-law will sign loan, will say medical, he's old, won't understand. Irving's face went from red to white in seconds. That's taken out of context. The context, Maxwell said pleasantly, is fraud conspiracy, Mr. Dunn. He handed documents to several guests near the front. Photocopied timeline. March loan application with medical purpose. April property purchase for Irving and Eva. April through July, no contact with Waldo, despite urgent treatment. Several people pulled out reading glasses to examine the papers. Maxwell continued, addressing the entire room now. At 3:00 p.m. today, the Miami-Dade County Recorder's Office processed a property transfer. The house at 456 Alhambra Circle, purchased with fraudulently obtained funds, has been transferred to Mr. Waldo Hawkins. The room exploded into murmurs. Iva's scream cut through them all. You can't do this. We live here. This is our home. Maxwell barely glanced at her. Mrs. Dunn, you've lived here for 3 months, in a house purchased with fraudulent funds. You have no legal claim to this property. Irving lunged forward, trying to grab the documents from Maxwell's hands. 2 guests stepped between them, not to protect Maxwell, but to see the paperwork themselves. I'll sue. This is theft. This is... Sue? Maxwell's eyebrows rose. With what money, Mr. Dunn? My research shows you're $340,000 in debt. But please consult an attorney. They'll tell you the same thing. Sydney had sunk to his knees in front of me, literally on his knees, hands clasped like he was begging for his life. Please. I didn't know it would go this far. I just wanted my parents to finally respect me. I looked down at him, this man who'd convinced my daughter to betray her own father. You wanted their respect, so you used me as a tool. You faked a terminal illness. You convinced my daughter to betray her father. They were going to lose everything. I had to help them. You don't understand what it's like. I don't understand. I cut him off. You told Inez I accomplished nothing in my life, that I just waste air, that I'm too old to understand money. Sydney's face showed genuine shock. He hadn't known I'd heard those recordings. I didn't mean... You didn't mean for me to find out. That's different from not meaning it. Tom Bradford produced the final documents from his briefcase. As the loan was issued in Mr. Hawkins' name, and given the documented fraud in its procurement, the bank agreed to a deed in lieu of foreclosure arrangement. Mr. Hawkins will satisfy the debt. Irving and Iva Dunn will vacate the premises. I pulled out the key ring again, walked to the front door, and locked it. Then the garage side entrance, then the back patio door. Each key worked perfectly. Physical proof of ownership, demonstrated in front of 50 witnesses. The party guests had gone silent. Several were already leaving, not wanting to be associated with this disaster. Others stayed, phones recording everything, already mentally composing their social media posts. One of Irving's former colleagues approached him. "Irving, is this true? You knew about the fraud?" Irving couldn't answer. His whole body shook with rage and humiliation. Inez stood frozen in the center of the room, tears streaming down her face. She looked at me once, her expression destroyed. I felt something twist in my chest. She was still my daughter, still the little girl I'd bandaged after bicycle accidents. But she'd made her choices. A woman I recognized as one of Inez's work colleagues whispered to her companion, "I have to tell HR about this. We can't have someone involved in fraud working at the firm." The social destruction was complete. The legal destruction was complete. Everything I'd planned for 4 months had come together perfectly. So why did I feel so exhausted? One of the older guests approached me as others filed out. "Mr. Hawkins, I'm sorry this happened to you. You showed remarkable restraint." I nodded, but couldn't find words. Restraint? I'd just destroyed my daughter's life in front of 50 people. Justified? Yes. Legal? Absolutely. Necessary? Probably. But standing in this house that was now mine, watching Inez sob while Sydney knelt on the floor and Irving shouted empty threats at Maxwell, I felt no triumph. Only the hollow ache of a family shattered beyond repair. The guests filed out in uncomfortable silence. Some offered apologies as they passed. Most just left quickly, phones already out, fingers flying across screens. Irving didn't leave. He stood in what used to be his living room, shaking with rage. "You think you've won?" His voice cracked. "I'll destroy you in court. I'll prove you manipulated this entire situation. You're a bitter old man who couldn't handle being irrelevant." Maxwell stepped between us, phone already in hand. "Mr. Dunn, I strongly advise you not to threaten my client. I'm prepared to file for a restraining order based on this conversation alone." "Restrain me? In my house?" I kept my voice quiet. "It's not your house, Irving. It never was. The deed says so. The bank says so. The county records say so. You built your celebration on fraud, and now the foundation collapsed." He lunged forward. Maxwell raised his phone. "I'm calling police if you take one more step." Iva collapsed into a chair, hyperventilating. A neighbor who'd stayed called 911. The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later, another layer of humiliation for the Dunns. I gave them 48 hours to collect their belongings. Within hours, the videos started circulating. Robert Sterling called, showing me the posts. 200,000 views by midnight, 500,000 by morning. Comment sections filled with outrage, schadenfreude, amateur legal analysis. Sydney's car dealership received dozens of calls. Inez's LinkedIn profile got bombarded with messages. Irving's former business partners posted about always knowing something was off. The digital destruction happened faster than I'd anticipated. 2 days later, Irving and Sydney hired Marcus Whitley, my son-in-law's parents apparently borrowing $10,000 from Eva's sister. Whitley filed an emergency motion claiming elder abuse, that I'd manipulated the situation, that I'd orchestrated an elaborate trap, that Irving and Eva were innocent purchasers who knew nothing of loan fraud. Maxwell called me at home. "It's frivolous, but we need to take it seriously. Hearing scheduled for July 29th. That's 1 week." Can they win? Not with the evidence we have, but judges are unpredictable when they hear elder abuse. We need more proof they knew about the scheme from the beginning. Robert Sterling found it 3 days later, an email thread from March 18th. Subject line, "Dad, the plan." Sydney to Irving, 9:47 p.m. "Met with father-in-law today. He signed everything. Told him it's for my cancer treatment. He actually cried. This is going to save you and Mom from losing your house." Irving's response, "Finally you do something right. Make sure he never finds out the truth. He's too old and out of touch to cause problems anyway." Iva was copied on the thread. Her response, 3 celebration emojis. I sat in Maxwell's office reading the emails, hands steady, jaw tight. "They knew," I said, "from the very beginning. All of them. Every single one." Maxwell tapped the printout. "This destroys their entire defense. I'll submit it tomorrow." The days that followed brought more news. Sydney's BMW repossessed on July 23rd, 6 a.m., tow truck, neighbors watching. Fired from the dealership July 24th for reputational concerns affecting customer trust. Inez's employer called her in for an HR meeting July 25th. She resigned rather than be terminated. Their landlord served an eviction notice July 26th. 2 months unpaid rent. Robert Sterling's reports came daily. I read them in my apartment, each one showing the systematic collapse I'd set in motion. Late on July 26th, I drove to the house on Alhambra Circle, my house now, legally recorded. I walked through the empty rooms. Irving and Iva had removed their furniture that afternoon, under my locksmith's supervision. I stood in the living room, where I'd exposed them, and pulled out my wallet. Inside was a photo of Inez at age 8, gap-toothed smile, holding up a baseball trophy. Had the public humiliation been necessary? Could I have resolved this privately? I called Maxwell. Having second thoughts, he asked. Not about justice. They committed fraud. But the method? Could we have handled this privately, given them a chance to make it right quietly? Waldo, they had 4 months to come clean. They ghosted you. They celebrated their fraud at a 50-person party. They chose the public stage. You simply revealed the truth on that same stage. I know. I rubbed my eyes. She's still my daughter. Yes, and she'll recover from this. But only if she faces real consequences. You're teaching, not destroying. I hung up and sat in the darkness, watching car lights move across the ceiling. The next morning, I prepared for court, reviewed all evidence with Maxwell, practiced staying calm under questioning. Worried about Whitley's elder abuse angle. What if the judge saw me as vindictive rather than victimized? Let the facts tell the story, Maxwell advised. Don't get emotional, just answer questions honestly. July 28th evening, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. The text said, Dad, it's me. Sydney left. I lost everything. I know I don't deserve to talk to you, but I need you to know I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Inez. I stared at the message for a long time. Read it again. Again. Didn't respond. Set the phone down and looked out at the Miami skyline, lights glittering in the humid darkness. Tomorrow was the court hearing. Tonight I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what I'd done, not just to Sidney and his parents, but to my daughter. Necessary, justified, legal, but still devastating. The Miami-Dade County Courthouse smelled like floor polish and stale coffee. Maxwell and I arrived at 9:30 for the 10 o'clock hearing. Sidney, Irving, and Eva sat across the hallway with Marcus Whitley, their attorney, who wore an expensive suit that screamed desperation, probably borrowed the retainer money. Inez wasn't there. I didn't know if that relieved or disappointed me. Judge Patricia Morrison took the bench at 10:07. Early 60s, former prosecutor, reading glasses on a chain. She'd reviewed our filings. I could tell by how she looked at Whitley when he stood. Your Honor, my clients are victims of an elaborate scheme. Mr. Whitley, she held up one finger. I've read your motion. I've also read the response, including the email communications between your clients discussing the fraudulent loan application. Would you like to explain those before we waste more time? Whitley stammered through his argument anyway. 20 minutes of claiming I'd orchestrated an entrapment, that I'd pretended to be a vulnerable elderly man while actually being a sophisticated con artist, that Irving and Eva were innocent purchasers. Maxwell stood when invited. He didn't argue. He simply presented the timeline, the bank audit, the unanswered calls to Inez, the medical records showing no cancer treatment, the email thread. Judge Morrison asked me to testify. I took the stand, placed my hand on the Bible. Actually, no, there was no Bible, just an affirmation that I'd tell the truth. The movies always get that wrong. Maxwell asked straightforward questions. I gave straightforward answers. Why did you wait from April until July to take action? I called my daughter 47 times. I sent dozens of text messages. I tried to understand what happened. I hoped there was some explanation, some mistake. I wanted to give her a chance to make it right privately. Did she ever respond? Not once. I was dead to her the moment I signed those papers. I'd served my purpose. What purpose was that? I looked at Irving and Sidney. To be a tool, a bank account with no feelings and no rights. They thought I was a foolish old man who collected stamps in a cheap apartment, too insignificant to defend myself. Judge Morrison asked Maxwell to present the email thread. He read it aloud, Sidney's words about my tears, Irving's response about me being too old to cause problems, Iva's celebration emojis. I watched Irving's face go white. The judge removed her reading glasses. Mr. Whitley, I've reviewed all submitted materials. Your client's emails are remarkably clear. Told him it's for my cancer treatment. He actually cried. Those are your client's own words. Explain to me how this constitutes anything other than premeditated fraud. Your Honor, that message was taken out of context. Context? The context is crystal clear. Your clients conspired to defraud an elderly man by fabricating a terminal illness. They discussed it in writing. They celebrated their deception. And now they want this court to believe they are the victims? She didn't even pause. Motion denied. I'm further ordering defendants to pay Mr. Hawkins reasonable attorney fees in the amount of $15,000 within 30 days. This was a frivolous filing that wasted judicial resources. The gavel came down. Sydney caught me in the hallway, grabbing my sleeve. Please, you won. You got the house. You humiliated us. What more do you want? Drop the debt collection. Let us start over. I removed his hand. What more do I want? I want you to understand what you did. You convinced my daughter to betray her own father. You faked a terminal illness. You made me cry thinking you were dying. I know, I'm sorry. I was desperate. My parents were going to lose everything. So you decided I should lose everything instead? My credit, my dignity, my daughter? Sydney, actions have consequences. Welcome to yours. I'm filing bankruptcy. I lost my job. I have nothing. I walked away. Then you're finally being honest. For once in your life, you have exactly what you earned. The next day, through intermediaries, I presented Sydney with formal demand for the $67,000 in debts I'd purchased. He filed Chapter 7 bankruptcy on August 2nd. The trustee seized everything: furniture, electronics, even his fake Rolex that pawned for $50. Robert Sterling's reports continued. Sydney working overnight warehouse shifts at $15 an hour, living with his parents in their foreclosing house. Inez evicted August 10th, staying on a friend's couch with $847 to her name. Divorce papers filed August 8th. Irving called me on August 5th. His voice had lost all its bluster. Hawkins, we need to talk, man to man. I believe we said everything necessary in court, Irving. We're going to lose our house, our actual house, where we've lived for 30 years. Iva's health is failing from the stress. Isn't there any way to what? Stop the foreclosure you caused with your own financial incompetence? That has nothing to do with me, Irving. You have millions. You could buy the debt. I laughed, actually laughed. You want me to save you? After you called me too old to cause problems? After you celebrated stealing from me? Irving, I'm not your bank. Find your own way out. I was wrong about everything. You're not old and worthless. You're formidable. Eva and we're sorry. I believe that's true. You're sorry you got caught. Goodbye, Irving. August 14th, I met with Maxwell in his office for what he called our final session. It's over, Waldo. They have no legal options left. Sydney's in bankruptcy. Irving and Iva will lose their original house by end of August. Inez is functionally homeless. You've won completely. Why doesn't it feel like winning? Because you're not a cruel person. You sought justice, not destruction. But justice for betrayal looks like destruction from the outside. I told him about Inez's text. Do you believe her? Maxwell asked carefully. I don't know yet, but I replied, told her we'd talk when she's ready to hear difficult truths. You're giving her a path back. That's more than she deserves. Maybe. Or maybe it's what I need. August 15th, I sat in the house on Alhambra Circle as the sun set. 5 months since that phone call in March. 5 months since my daughter's tears and Sydney's fake diagnosis. I looked at Inez's text from July 28th, my reply from August 12th. We need to talk, not now, but soon. The phone rang. Inez, first time in 5 months. I let it ring twice, 3 times, then answered. Hello, Inez. Her voice was small, broken. Dad, can I come see you? I need to understand who you really are. Long pause. Outside, palm trees swayed in the evening breeze. Yes, come tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock. Be ready to listen. I hung up and stared out the window at the city lights. Tomorrow would either begin healing or confirm it was impossible. The doorbell rang at precisely 7 p.m. on August 17th. I opened the door to find my daughter transformed. Inez had lost weight, wore thrift store clothing I didn't recognize, no makeup, hair pulled back simply. Her eyes were red from crying. "Dad, can I come in?" I stepped aside without speaking, led her to the living room, gestured to a chair, sat across from her, not beside her. The distance was deliberate. 5 minutes of heavy silence. I let it build weight, let her feel the discomfort of what she'd done. Finally, she broke. "I destroyed my life, didn't I?" Her voice shook. "Sydney left me 2 days ago, said I couldn't control you, that everything fell apart because of me. Irving and Iva blame me too, say I brought disaster into their family." I said nothing. "I lost my job, my apartment, my husband, and you. And you know what's worst? I lost you back in March when I decided you were just a tool, not a person, not my father." Her tears came harder now. "When Sydney first suggested the loan scheme, I said no. I did, but he kept pushing, said his parents would lose their house, said you had money sitting around doing nothing, said it wouldn't hurt you because you didn't understand finances anyway." She wiped her face with her sleeve. "And then I started believing it, that you really were a failure, that you'd accomplished nothing, that you owed us something. I became a monster, Dad. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I studied her. The remorse looked genuine, but I'd been fooled before. "Sydney said," she hesitated, "he said you somehow have millions, that you've been hiding it. Is that true? Who are you really, Dad? I realized I don't actually know." I sat quiet for a long moment, then stood. "You're right, you don't know, but that's partially my choice. Come here." I led her to my study. The framed stamps hung on the walls. She'd glanced at them earlier without really seeing them. I opened the safe in the corner. She watched as I removed documents one by one. Business sale papers from 2020, real estate portfolio, professional appraisals, photographs. What is all this? This is who I actually am." I spread the papers across the desk. Or rather, who I was in my professional life. I showed her the business sale documents first. I worked as an art dealer for 35 years. Started in 1985, built a client base of wealthy collectors, consulted for museums, authenticated pieces for auction houses. In 2020, I sold my business for $3.8 million. Her hand went to her mouth. I continued, systematic and calm. I invested wisely. Own rental properties across Florida worth approximately $1.2 million. Generate passive income of about $6,000 monthly. I picked up the philatelic appraisals. My quirky hobby? This collection is worth roughly $400,000. Some individual stamps are worth more than most people's cars. Finally, I showed her a photograph from 1997. Me in an expensive suit at a Metropolitan Museum opening, standing beside a Sotheby's board member. "This is me at a Metropolitan Museum opening. That man next to me, he's on Sotheby's board of directors. We worked together for 15 years. Inez stared at the photograph, then at me, speechless. "Why hide it?" I sat back down. "Because money changes people, Inez. I watched it happen hundreds of times in my career. Genuine relationships corrupted by knowledge of wealth. Friends becoming sycophants. Family treating you like a bank instead of a person. I wanted my family, you, your mother when she was alive, to love me for who I am, not what I have. So I lived modestly, drove an old car, rented a small apartment, collected stamps people thought was an eccentric hobby." My voice hardened. "And you know what? It worked. It showed me exactly who people really are when they think you're ordinary. When Sydney decided I was a worthless old man who wastes air, it revealed his character. When you agreed to betray me, it revealed yours. I failed the test," she whispered. "I failed everything." "Yes, you did, but tests can be retaken. Whether you pass next time, that's up to you." I leaned forward, making sure she heard every word. "Here's what you need to understand, Inez. Even if I had been what Sydney claimed, poor old man with nothing but a stamp collection, I still would have deserved respect, truth, dignity. Your crime wasn't just taking my money. It was deciding I had no value as a human being, that I existed only to serve your purposes, that my feelings, my life, my autonomy didn't matter." I picked up one of the framed stamps from the wall. "You see these stamps? Most valuable things don't look valuable to an untrained eye. Requires wisdom, experience, careful attention to recognize true worth. Same with people. Sydney saw an old man in a cheap apartment and decided, worthless. Never looked deeper. Never asked questions. Never wondered if the surface told the whole story. And you believed him. She was sobbing now. What do I do now? How do I fix this? I stood, walked to the window, looked out at the Miami lights. Long silence. Now we see if you can rebuild yourself into a person worthy of a second chance. Come back in 3 days. I'll have a proposal. I showed her to the door. She left, shell-shocked, barely able to walk straight. I closed the door and leaned against it, exhaled deeply, whispered to the empty house. I hope you can do it, sweetheart. I really do. First time I'd let myself show that vulnerability. That despite everything, I wanted my daughter back, if she could earn it. 3 days later, Inez returned. I laid out the proposal across my kitchen table, loan agreement, rental contract, therapy requirements, all documented, all official. I've thought carefully about what happens next. You asked how to fix this. Answer is, you probably can't. Not completely, but you can try to become a better person than you were. She listened without interrupting. Here's what I'm offering. One chance. One only. $50,000 as a loan, not a gift, at 2% interest. You'll repay when you're able. I'm purchasing a small apartment where you'll pay $500 monthly rent. Symbolic amount to remind you nothing is free. I ticked off the conditions. Weekly therapy for at least 6 months. Find a job within 60 days. Any honest work. Submit monthly financial reports showing you're living responsibly. Stay away from Sydney and his family. Accept that I may never fully trust you again. I accept, her voice was steady. All of it. Thank you for... Don't thank me yet. Thank me in 5 years if you've actually changed. This isn't forgiveness. It's opportunity. Use it wisely. 4 days later, Maxwell arranged the mediation. Sydney Irving and Eva had agreed to formal apologies on record as part of a settlement to avoid criminal prosecution. They'd arrive at his office at 2 p.m. I got there at 1:30. Sydney arrived looking defeated. Cheap clothes, weight loss, dark circles. He could barely meet my eyes. Maxwell handed him a prepared statement. Mr. Dunn, please read this. Sydney's hands shook. I, Sydney Dunn, acknowledge that in March 2025, I fraudulently induced Waldo Hawkins to co-sign a loan under false pretenses. I fabricated a terminal illness diagnosis to manipulate his emotions. I diverted loan proceeds intended for medical treatment to real estate purchase, benefiting my parents. His voice cracked. I participated in conspiracy to defraud. I showed no remorse until facing consequences. I manipulated my wife against her father. I called Mr. Hawkins worthless when he was actually a successful man I underestimated completely. He looked up finally. You were right about everything. I'm sorry. Long silence. I accept your apology, Sydney. My tone stayed flat. I don't forgive you. Learn to live with your choices like I live with mine. Irving came next. He'd aged dramatically, voice barely audible. I encouraged my son, told him Mr. Hawkins was too old and out of touch to cause problems. I knew about the fake cancer story. I celebrated when the loan closed. I called him worthless. He finally met my eyes. I apologize. I was a prideful fool who destroyed his own son, trying to prove something to nobody who cared. I'm sorry. I studied him. You're sorry you got caught, Irving. Sorry your scheme failed. Sorry your house is in foreclosure. But are you sorry you hurt me? I don't think you understand that part yet. He deflated. You're right. I don't know how to... I'm not good at... I know. That's why I don't forgive you. Maybe someday you'll understand what you actually did wrong. Until then, goodbye. Iva couldn't even speak, just cried and nodded. I didn't engage. There was nothing to say. The next day, Inez signed my documents without negotiation. $50,000, 2% interest. Repayment schedule begins when I'm employed full-time for 6 consecutive months. This is more than fair, Dad. It's not about fairness. It's about rebuilding trust through demonstrated responsibility. You'll succeed or fail based on your choices, not my support. She signed the rental agreement. $500 monthly for a 1-bedroom studio. I can manage that even on entry-level salary. You'll have to. I won't carry you. You're 35 years old. Time to build a life based on your own work, not someone else's money. I understand. I won't let you down this time. I handed her the keys and the check. Come for coffee next Sunday if you want. Maybe we can start rebuilding something. but it won't be what we had. That's gone forever. I sold the house on Alhambra Circle for $725,000, paid off the bank loan, broke even financially, but won everything that mattered. Used part of the proceeds to buy a small condo in downtown Miami. Bay views, close to the cultural district. Significantly nicer than my old apartment, but still modest for my actual means. A new chapter without pretense. September 1st, Inez came for Sunday coffee on my new balcony. I started a new job yesterday, she said, looking out over Biscayne Bay. Junior marketing coordinator at a small nonprofit. Pays $38,000. It's humble, but it's honest. Honest work is valuable work. How's therapy? Hard. Dr. Morrison makes me confront things I'd rather avoid, like how I let Sydney define my worth, how I judged you by his standards instead of my own. I picked up my magnifying glass, examined a stamp from my collection. You know, most valuable things look ordinary to an untrained eye. This stamp? Penny black from 1840, one of the first postage stamps ever made, worth approximately $3,000. Looks like a bit of old paper. It's not just about stamps, is it? I smiled slightly. No, it's about learning to see true value, in objects and in people, including yourself. You're rebuilding. That's worth more than any stamp. A sailboat passed below, white against blue water. Seagulls called overhead. I met someone at the Perez Art Museum last week, I said. Her name is Carmen. She's a docent there. We're having dinner Thursday. Inez's eyes widened. Dad, that's wonderful. Maybe, we'll see. I set down the magnifying glass. Point is, life continues forward, with or without the people who hurt us. Sometimes with the ones who learn from their mistakes. She reached across the small table, squeezed my hand. I let her. Not forgiveness, not yet. Maybe never completely, but a beginning. Looking back now, from this balcony overlooking the bay, I understood something I'd spent decades trying to teach through stamps. True value isn't about appearance, it's about substance. I'd lived modestly thinking it would preserve authentic relationships. Instead, it taught me who people become when they think you're powerless. Was the lesson worth the price? I still didn't know. But I knew this. I was 67 years old, and for the first time in years, I wasn't hiding. Not pretending to be less than I am. Not making myself small so others feel big. Inez came for coffee every Sunday now. We were careful with each other, testing boundaries, rebuilding trust one honest conversation at a time. It wasn't the relationship we had. That died in March when she chose Sydney's lies over my truth. But maybe what we were building now was better. Founded on reality instead of illusion. Yesterday, I bought a new stamp for my collection. Inverted Jenny, 1918. Cost me $12,000. 20 years ago, I would have hidden that purchase, worried what people thought. Now, I framed it and hung it where I can see it every morning. A reminder that flying upside down sometimes leads you exactly where you need to be. The sun set over the water, turning the sky orange and gold. Inez asked me about the difference between perforations and rouletting. I explained patiently, watching her lean forward with genuine interest. Real conversations, honest relationships. True value finally recognized. Not the ending I'd imagined back in March when my daughter's tears had seemed so genuine, but an ending I could live with, maybe even one I'd earned. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.